Welcome to the Rethink Sales Podcast. I'm Mark Danilo.
And I'm Michelle Seeger.
And we're talking about transformation delusion. Why do we expect big changes when we repeat the same old patterns? And how do we fix that for our lives and our businesses? And this episode, we're talking to Roland Zelles. And Roland was the CRO of Autodesk and made a huge transformation when they moved from premise-based software to SaaS-based software in the cloud, which sounds commonplace now, but back when they did it, they were one of the first 5 companies to do it. So this is a great conversation.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And Mark, one of the things that I learned is you asked Roland, what would he do differently? And what he said is a bit surprising. He said, I would have been bolder and moved faster. And that's one of the pieces, one of the many pieces of advice that he has for everyone who's listening today.
So we're going to dive into the topic of transformation. And we're going to hear some stories about what it was really like, because we kind of look at it now and it was kind of like de facto, oh yeah, companies made this transition, companies are still doing it. But this is a really, really big thing back when it happened and when Roland led.
Yeah, it sure is. I'm really excited for the conversation today. Roland, we've had a lot of great conversations within the past, and now we're going to just spread the word, aren't we?
Yep. So Roland, welcome.
Great to meet you, Mark and Michelle, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
So you've had an amazing run at Autodesk, and now and you've been teaching at university for years, and you're doing that now, and you're doing advisory work, you're doing board work. Tell us a little bit as we start out just about your story, like how did you get to all the great things that you've done, and tell us a little bit about the path that you took.
Okay, it's actually not so interesting. You know, I'm an engineer by education, and interesting enough, all of my life I worked in the software industry, or actually, I'm being precise, in the CAD/CAM CA industry. So I started software development during university for a German CAD vendor. At that time, it was quite new, and it was also the time where Autodesk was born, AutoCAD. I think a lot of people know that. And then I, worked for 1 year at the university, a little less than 1 year at the university. And then I got my first job in Huntsville, Alabama. It was my first time I worked in the US at that time, and then stayed with that company, now Hexagon. That time it was Intergraph, for 6 years, then moved to Autodesk and stayed there for more than 29 years. And as you mentioned, at the end, I was the chief revenue officer, and and we going from one change to the next, and I think was quite happy about everything we achieved, and helping Autodesk, I think, to be the largest player in this market now.
Yeah, amazing. And so tell us, back when you came to the U.S., Huntsville, Alabama, after being from Germany, what was that like for you in terms of just the cultural?
I was going to ask that question. I'm fascinated to hear about that. So different.
It's quite funny. I didn't even know where Huntsville, Alabama is when I signed the contract. So, and with my wife at that time already, she was a civil servant. So, and it was possible for her to kind of stop working or put like an unpaid holiday and join me. So, and if you ask her and me today, still, this was one of our best times in our life.
Right.
Hardly anybody went to the US for software development at that time. And, people were wondering, okay, why do they need you? What we figured out later, I think it's, in the deep south, and a lot of people always wondering. The biggest challenge for me was language, because, until I understood, I raised up in Alabama to get the slang and to get into that one, but lovely people, wonderful environment, and, great food. So still have friends there. And this is after so many years.
So
that's great.
So Michelle, you're kind of a master of languages. Michelle speaks a few languages, but I know when you learn a language, probably when you learn English in Europe, you're not learning it with a Southern accent, right? So that had to really throw you.
It's a little different.
I tell you a funny story. The first time I got a call, and at that time there was no number identification on the phone.
Okay.
I picked up the phone. I was listening for probably 90 seconds. I didn't understand a word. I just put
Oh,
I just put the telephone down again and was like, shit, what did I do? And then I think it's, you start to learn again and put your books out. And I think because I think it was like 21 days until we had to leave Germany, and
Uh,
actually my wife did. It was good. No,
oh
it's
my
when
God.
you listen into it, and then I think it's all good. It was very fine.
so when you're looking ahead now with where you are, what are you most excited about in the next chapter?
I do actually, we just talked about languages. I'm challenged with learning Italian.
Oh,
And it's just,
fun.
going through the grammar, I just realized why I didn't enjoy Latin at school, but that's aside. Reason I do that is, I have a house and I invested in hospitality. So I bought a small hotel in Italy and changed it into a holiday apartment. But other than that, I, work at the university. So I have two assignments at two different universities, doing some board work, work with some startup companies, and I also work with several global private equity companies actually to kind of help on probably some board assignments, but also help on how to put things together, get a plan, and keeps me busy. So far on retirement,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I
Sounds
think
like a
it's
lot of fun.
this thing is I can do what I really enjoy.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah, yeah.
that's
So
great.
let's jump into it on transformation. And Roland, we had a chance to talk previously, and one thing you said was because I asked you about transformation, and you said, well, we didn't even use the word transformation back then. In
Mm.
fact, as we were getting set up today, we were talking about this word transformation, and it's kind of become obsolete now. But what do you see as like what is transformation, or what is significant change in your mind, like versus just we're kind of making incremental change in the business? How do you know that you're in the midst of a transformation, or you're going to go into one?
So when we spoke actually, and this was when we made the change in the company, this was 2011 it started, and then 2014 announcements were made. So the term wasn't so popular, I would say. I think for me, what transformation really is, it means you change, and you change regular, and you constantly make decisions about the future where you don't know the outcome. And I think there's a tendency sometimes to overplan, and I think you have to plan. Don't get me wrong, but I think to believe to put things into a framework, you can plan everything and you can predict all the outcome, and you cannot. And as we talk about the changes, you very very often you make an assumption, you make a change, and then you change very fast after that. And I think that's what happens, I think, with the transformation. I think in my opinion, it gives too often an impression there's a plan and you just follow a certain plan, and it's not.
Mm. So I'm curious to know a little bit about, to lay some context, what the environment was like in the industry and some of the drivers that led you to say, your company, right? Boy, we're going to SaaS.
It's quite interesting. I think
Mm.
when the early details happened, I worked in the US, in San Francisco, this time in San Francisco, San Rafael, at Autodesk.
That's a
And
nice place. You work in
there
nice
were
places.
certain things going on in the industry. I think some new competitors came up. 3D printing was like started the big thing. 3D printing was a big one. Cloud was one of these things, or SaaS models. I think, Salesforce, we talked about Salesforce earlier, I think is on the CRM. I think people could see how much faster you are with change and
Mm.
driving also the company forward. For our industry, it was really 3D printing. It was cloud, we could see that. And AI, actually, it was more machine learning. We weren't bold enough, by the way, to call it machine learning or AI because there was still lots of skepticism. So we called it generative design, okay, which was actually a machine learning algorithm to do the work of an engineer. So a lot of these things were going on, and we were in a perpetual model where you put all the effort in to win a customer, and then they kind of locked in because I think all the investment is done, and then you're in a maintenance model. And the CEO at that time, Karl Bass, was on the conviction that we have to fundamentally change the company to move towards a cloud business model, number one. Also, we had 175 software products, doing everything from like design to calculations, etc., and maintain all of that and integrating that one into suites and portfolios of products made it very complicated. While when you had a vision of a platform, customers could consume rather than, buy a software, install a software, use a software. So I think this was at that time. And then I think one of the last things which happened because of the business model, which is actually not very dynamic. The company also was kind of plateauing and wasn't growing enough, fast enough, and also didn't create the cash flow. So I think there was a business reason, but there was also industry reason and technology reasons, three things came at the same time, which made it necessary.
So then you made that commitment. I'm interested to hear how this was because, in a previous conversation, I believe with you, Mark, you mentioned that you are one of the first companies to burn the boats, right?
Yes.
You were making a change and you were not going to go back. So making that prem to SaaS. What was really that like and what was going on internally?
I think the only company I was aware was Adobe, which I think did the jump, but in our industry, nobody did it. And I talked a lot about culture when we talk about this change, because I think the company had like an extensive portfolio, as I mentioned, and it was a very autonomous, liberal or libertarian culture. And had some benefits, but it also came with that challenge that we didn't respond fast to change. And that's kind of the biggest problem for a company. And then I think, I talked about the technology. We also got an activist investor, which I think accelerated things a little more. Because we planned a lot from between 2011 and 14 and, introduced some subscription offerings and tried to experiment and understand a little better where we are. But then I think we had to go. And the big day was in fiscal 2015 at that time, when I think we announced the end of perpetual licenses. And I think everybody was looking forward to it a little bit, but on the management, but I think a lot of people were afraid because how will customers react? How will the competitors react? How will the employees react? Investors, I think the industry magazines, etc. So I think it was a big thing, and we did enough preparation to feel confident. But still, the day you do that, I think there's probably no return.
So you mentioned before your CEO was committed to it, and you had an activist investor that was committed to that. So you had these two big driving forces. You could see in the industry that Adobe had done it. I'm wondering, so you got driving forces to make the change, right? So we're committed. But when you looked in the industry, Salesforce.com was really born in the cloud, so they were already doing that. But were there examples as you started out where you said, "Hey, this is actually working for these companies," or was it like perceived as being a lot of risk?
No, nobody. And I think we were probably, as I said, I think there was Adobe around, but then from all perpetual software companies, the first one to go. And there were a lot of unknowns, and nobody knew, I think, how the customers would react. Karl Bass, our CEO at that time, I think he described it was like you drive with your car in a snowy night.
Right.
There's no track you can follow. The only thing is your headlight, and you have to make the decision, and then you have other people to follow your track, which actually happened later on. I think a lot of the competitors followed, and I think they're still doing that. I think 10 years later, I think you still have several of our competitors trying to do it or did it or in the middle of the change. So, which, being first is great because you may be the only one who is getting it wrong, or you have all the benefits of doing it and being successful.
Right, right. I mean, and you mentioned, okay, so prior conversation, you mentioned some of the math that was involved here. So you talked about the idea of disbelief, and you said something like it wasn't that people necessarily didn't want to go along with it, but they didn't believe in it. And then you talked about some interesting numbers, Roland. You said we got to 1 million customers in 30 years, but then the new model said we had to get to 5 million customers in just 5 more years.
Wow.
I mean, that just seems like insurmountable. So talk a little bit about this like huge jump in belief and what kind of reaction you got from the organization.
I can start with myself, I think, on this one, because, being in the sales organization, when you see these numbers, you also know what it means or could mean to your compensation. And also to the stress and the pressure you will have. I struggled. I think I understand the math and what all the great things it would do, but then I'm like, okay, why would we convince suddenly 4 million customers? So, and adding 4 million versus the 1 million we had. It was scary. The thing we did a lot, I think, is like, this comes to the headlines or you have no track. I think you create a plan. You must not be afraid at all. You have a plan and you move. If you don't fully understand it, it's like, okay, you kind of commit and try. And as I talked earlier, I think you have to commit to yourself. You change to change to change the change you changed. And you're in this constant mode of correcting things. And sometimes you do tactical moves just to get from point A to B. And then you change that again. And the difficulty is on the believers and disbelievers is to not lose the cause you have. Because you will find a lot of people who said, like, you have to avoid this "I told you so" people, because you make a change and then you figure out, okay, this actually doesn't work. It doesn't deliver the results you wanted. And you do another change, which I think you find all these people who like, okay, they don't know what they do. That's why they change again. And so you go through these cycles of constant change. And actually what happens is you build a new culture. And that's the most important thing in a company. As I mentioned earlier, I think, the most important thing is to get things right. And now you have to reach a culture, come to a culture where speed of change is everything. And then, you always get it right. Nobody knows what the future brings. Otherwise, I think all these smart people should go into investment banking and make all the bets about the future.
Yeah.
So you make decisions with a limited amount of information, and hopefully you make more right than wrong decisions. What it does, it's quite interesting. I think you immediately identify the people who are either not committed, and then some of them go on their own, and some of them you have to ask to help somebody else. An interesting number I remember is we had between 2013 and 2016, which was also the change from CEO Karl Bass to the current CEO Andrew Anagnost, 40% employee churn.
Wow.
So close to half of the employees only knew one CEO, which was the current one, which was only in place for like less than 2 years. I think this just tells you how much change was going on at that time.
Yeah. So that's a high number. And I'm curious, I've got like 2 questions, an internal and external facing one. So internally, how did you manage that change? So you've got some high turnover. Let's talk about some people that maybe weren't even asked to consider something else, but they just left due to that disbelief. And how did you deal with any internal conflict?
The most important thing, so why you want this change and why you drive it. I think, to be honest, we didn't plan for this number. Okay, it just turned out. I think that's what's going to happen. Is we knew you want to move to a new and different skill set, And also you want to have people who are fascinated about the future and not fascinated about the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's driving a lot of the change. And that what we did is, I think you can categorize people into, and you see that very fast, into, like, if you put an axis of willingness and skill,
Right.
there's people who can and want, and that's the one you want on your side, and that's become your change agents and help you to convince others. Then you have people who want but cannot. Okay,
Right.
you can train them. You can help them, I think,
Right.
if they're willing to do that. And then you have a group of, they can but they don't want to.
Mhm.
Yep.
Or then, okay, you have people who cannot and don't want. Okay, that's easy. But if you look to a lot of the employee statistics, I think, 10 to 20% are top performer, 60 to 70% are moderate. So how you identify the people who want and can
Right.
to become your advocates and drive a lot of the change. And the people you don't want is the one who can but don't want, because worst case, they can move into sabotage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you run into? I was curious about
Yeah.
that in terms of like sabotage or any kind of passive resistance. What did you see?
We always talked about passive aggressive.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's, I think it's it's a lot of people is like, they're very good in explaining you why you're wrong, why things don't work. And I think one thing is factual, why, what competitors do or why they don't do it. Um, and, I used the metaphor earlier with the driving in the snowy night with your headlights. I think
Right. Right.
there's no track. So I think you have to create your own track. And people who are afraid of that, I think ideally they decommit themselves, which happened in high volume, but also I think you have to drive some of the change. Um, and because you want people who actually really like and have a growth mindset. I think like the change, and also can see that it takes effort and it's not like an earned, but something you earned in the past. I think it's like, okay, you change something, you change again, and it's not about right or wrong. It's or smart and stupid. It's more, you can grow, you can learn. If you get it wrong, you have learned something, and now you know and you have more information to get things right. You
Right.
embrace the challenge. I think if you look at the growth mindset kind of philosophy, I think it helps a lot. And I think that's why I say you need new people, because you have to change the culture, and you have to change a lot on the operating
Mm.
model of a company.
Right. Right. So a question or two on this whole people thing. So I love your four quadrant description,
Mm.
right? The willingness to change and the ability to change and skill, and but that sounds good in retrospect. It has to be like when you're going through it, it may not be quite that clear. So are you proactively identifying the people that fit
Yes.
in those quadrants and taking some kind of action, or what are you doing in real terms?
Yes. So yes, you have. I think as sometimes memory is not so good on some things. So they dilute. They
Product.
sometimes you have a delusion to make things look perfect. Um, I would say half and half. So half of the people really decommitted and looked for something else,
Yeah.
and then half you had to drive.
Wow.
Specifically in sales, it was a need from moving to inside sales. If you go to a SaaS model, and also I think when you think about the pricing model and everything coming along with that, you need a different sales model as well. And in a classical sales organization, I think you have a lot of, I call it sales moderators. They participate in the sale, but they're not driving it, and they not really have the responsibility of value creation at the customer, and helping customers really to, end of the year, have a better balance sheet, have a better cash flow, have a better profit.
Right.
So this was the first target group, the sales moderators. So you
Mm.
have true salespeople and true kind of change agents, in the organization, and the other ones, I think you had to remove, and you have to remove.
Sales moderators. I love that. So when you're having all this turnover, Roland, one thing I think leaders would be concerned about is, okay, we're going through this change and we're taking a lot of damage here. You know, we're losing people. How do you keep the morale going when you're losing people, even if you know we're going to lose people? Because you know it may not be perceived as healthy in the organization. While people are quitting, they're jumping from the sinking ship, right? But not really, because you're evolving. How do you manage that perception?
I think the key is to make the unfamiliar familiar,
Uh-huh.
to build a bridge to something unknown,
Yeah.
and create a vision or try to explain it as good as you know it with that information you have. I had a nice metaphor from somebody. You have to explain it, because if you think about somebody is clapping a song, you I may have a song in mind when I clap the song, but you have no idea. And the same thing is whether you call it transformation or the change or the vision of the company, somebody has to explain it over and over and explain why reaching the other side is so much better.
Yeah.
And then also creating a psychological safety so that people are able to say the unpleasant truths without appearing to be decommitted. I think that's the difficulty in that one, because I think you have people who are committed and decommitted. You have people who believe and disbelieve, but then people have questions, and allowing really having an environment where people actually can ask these questions. And a lot of these questions are very valid because customers, investors, partners, have the same question. And how you're able to answer them, and you learn to answer them better. And that's why I think this change of, you change the change and take risk and try new ideas. And then, when you change it again, it wasn't a mistake. It's something you learned and you do it better. That's, I think, from an employee side. And the biggest challenge as a leader is you have to delegate a lot of decisions, and you need to allow people to make a lot of decisions very fast. And one of the biggest learnings for me was you watch it and then you think, I would have made a different decision, but different doesn't mean better or worse. It's just different.
Right.
And
right.
to allow people to make their own decisions, make their own mistakes or their own successes, and then correct them or improve them later on. And for me, that's for as a leader, it's very difficult. I think at the beginning, because you really have to build a lot of trust and confidence in your team,
Right.
and just go with the decision.
And that's one of the principles, Roland, we've picked up in these conversations we've been having with leaders, is the idea that you can't own the change just as a leadership team. You've got to give that to the organization, and then they have to take that and do it. And when that happens, you're going to see a different approach or a different interpretation. Like you said, it may not be wrong, but it's just different than you might have done. But that creates ownership, right?
Yep.
You know what was one of the most interesting experiences? Sometimes, like our CEO, Andrew, made a decision. Nobody had an idea how to get that. But I don't know, I'm not sure he would say it this way, but I think he did that in the confidence and the knowledge we somehow will figure it out.
Right.
And I think it's a compliment on the one hand side, but at the other, when I think the next thing comes, you kind of, oh, holy, how are we doing that now? And then I think you just develop a muscle as an organization that I think, everything is possible. And then you're also able to do that. But as you rightly said, I think the biggest challenge at the very beginning is you have to trust the kind of, crowd intelligence of the organization.
So I want to pick up on two words that you had used over the past few minutes. One was purpose, and then you used the word vision. And again, we've heard this in other conversations we've had, that the way you get through these kind of big transformational changes, I'll use a different word, is you have to have a very clear mission that people can own, right? Because there's got to be a bigger purpose to this than just making the change. So what I want to ask you is, in some of the companies we talk to, I'll give you an example, like maybe it's a healthcare company. And so the mission becomes about, we want to give patients access to, better care, whatever it might be, because there's a big gap and it's going to make life better for them. And right. And everybody feels good about that and they get on board and they'll fight for that, right? In terms of the employees, because this is a bigger purpose rather than just, we're going to make more money, right? So when you make a change from premise to cloud or SaaS, and maybe you don't need to do this in that situation, but how do you articulate a bigger mission or a bigger purpose that people will buy off on versus this is just a better business model for us? Because that only lasts so long before people go, this isn't working, let's back out.
Interesting that you mentioned that. Is exactly what happened. We created a new vision and a new mission statement and also value statement. So what you stand for as a company, I think, and we started with some, we help people imagine, design, and create a better world.
Good. Yeah.
In the industry where like a lot of our customers are engineers, and then I think it moved into something like make anything. So this was one important change. The other big changes which go along with the vision and the mission and the values was, we didn't use the word burn the boats, of course. I think it sometimes was used in conversations, but it was making unreversible decisions. Okay, you make a decision, you cannot reverse it. The minute you go, there is no way back. You can only move forward, okay? And for that, I think we put a lot of effort in also new cultural capabilities which came along with that. So people talk a lot about psychological safety, but what does it mean? How you as a team, a management team, an organization, how you work, decision making, inclusive leadership, or risk taking. So just one simple example, and then an organizational structure which kind of follows what you're trying to achieve. For instance, one of the things a lot of people struggle is, okay, how's decisions being made? It's in most companies. There's always, when you look about like employee surveys, there's typically the two low-rated items are communication, always, and the other one is decision making. I think, and decision making is a bit of a tricky one because people may not like the decision, or some people may think they should be involved in the decision, or they just disagree with the decision. And you never find out exactly. So this was one big thing which actually helped a lot, is doing training on people helping to make a decision. Different companies have different models. So what we did is, okay, somebody comes in with a proposal, then a little bit like in the sales process, everybody asks clarifying questions first. So this helps the person who made the proposal to see, okay, what was not well understood. And you make sure also that everybody kind of has a say and everybody's really speaking up. Then you ask people to make improvements and suggest improvements. And then you kind of reissue your proposal after everything you heard on the questions, etc. And you go there, and then, okay, you communicate the decision. And I think it sounds very simple and banal, but on the other hand, it helped a lot people to understand, okay, I'm part of the decision. I can raise my concern or make my argument, and then you also learn, okay, the world is not binary. Other people have a different point of view, and other customers or other industries react different. So that was probably equally important. Is on the mission, vision, values, was the kind of cultural change in the organization where you move to much more fast-moving crowd intelligence organization.
So let's pause right here and we'll pick up in our next episode.
See you then.
Thanks for joining us. And remember, Sales Globe is a revenue growth consulting and services firm focused on helping our clients reach their revenue growth aspirations through better solution development and operationalizing to get results.